So joining me today, we have two of our Learning Solutions engineers and Lectura experts, Josh Bleggi and Domenic. Caloia. So without further ado, I'm going to let them share all of their Lectura wisdom with you.
Hey, thank you, Stephanie. Appreciate the introduction. I'll go ahead and share my screen. So Dominic and I will be trading off who's sharing the screen. So just know that when you see screens transition, that is supposed to be happening and we didn't lose connection or something on you. But it's good to be here and talk about Lectura with you. And today we're going to be talking about 6 Lectura tips. But that 6 tips is kind of a misnomer. I think we kind of figured out as we're going through this. We really have about 10 that we're going to be showing you, but they fall into 6 different buckets. And so we'll be, going through that here today. But before we start, Stephanie, do we have a poll that we can put up just so we can learn a little more about you as an audience?
Absolutely. So I will launch that one. You can tell us a little bit about your experience with Lectura, how many years you've been using it, if you've ever tried it. All right, we've got some answers coming in. It's a pretty varied group today so far.
Great.
Give it another minute. Let everybody get a chance to click on that. You can click on that right on the screen. So many years I've lost count. We have some hardcore Lectura users in this group.
If that's your answer, feel free to, put how many you think it is in the chat. So that way we can kind of see where the line is drawn. Because I know there's a lot of you that have been using it since, I don't want to say dawn of time, but at least dawn of Lectura back,
And then we'll just upgrade you to a panelist and you can give the rest of the webinar.
Exactly. You probably know more than I do. And we'll just kind of let you go.
All right, I'm going to end that and I'll share these results here. So it's a pretty even mix of people who've never used Lectura, people who've used it for a few years, and people who've used it for a lot of years.
Well, that's great. Yeah, we got a whole wide different audience there. So as we're going through today, what I invite you to do in the chat, as well as, even through the Q&A panel, is if you have, additional questions, obviously, if you're new to Lectura, feel free to ask those in that chat. If we can get to them in the webinar, we will. If we can't, we'll follow up with you either individually or as part of the follow-up email. But if you're, one of those Lectura experts that have been using it for so long that you can't even count the number, we just invite you to maybe put in your additional comments and things that maybe Dominic and I don't point out as part of this webinar as we go through, because we really want to share that knowledge as a community. And we do want to keep this kind of an open forum. So like Dominic and I, we do have an outline for this particular session today, but we are going to be going back and forth and keeping this very light and conversational. So feel free to interject with your comments in the chat there or in the question and answer panel if you wish. But so with all that being set up front here, our agenda for today is going to kind of follow these 6 different tips that we are going to look into. And like I said, there's 6 different areas that we're going to cover, but there's actually going to be like 10 different things that we're going to show you, demoing them in Lectura, talking about them in brief today. But if you want to learn more, there will be some questions on the follow-up survey that will ask you, what you'd like to learn more about. And so feel free to put comments in there. We will, be looking at that for future Lectura lives, as well as just general follow-up with emails and videos and things like that. But this is going to be kind of our list for today. And these are in no real particular order. We did try to keep things grouped in a way that was, somewhat sequential when we could. But these are just 6 things that Dominic and I have found through our experience really help us develop good learning experiences, help us develop more effectively and efficiently. And so these are what we're going to be covering today. And so the first one is going to be don't start from scratch if you don't have to. Now, if you've ever been on a demo with me, if you've ever seen me talk about Lectura, one of the things I always point out is our template library. And the reason for that is we have a set of really good developers that are going through and making different types of interactions and layouts and wireframes and things like that to help you streamline your development. And some of these are going to be really heavily styled ones that you can go in and just change the colors of and have a nice layout going already. Some of them are going to be just like this wireframe that you're seeing right here that is completely unstyled. And especially when you're starting out with Lectura, and even as you get more experienced, templates really help you develop a lot quicker because all that work is done for you. All the thought process around building this particular template is created for you. So going back to first template we saw here. So this one I actually built all on my own. This wasn't built from a template. And with all the thinking that I'm doing to how do I want this to function? What different things do I want to have happen here? And it's just a very simple click to reveal. I didn't fully stopwatch time this particular one, but it took me a couple, probably a couple hours to think through, okay, how did I want it to build? The actual building of it was a lot shorter than that, but just kind of the process you have to go through thinking through each of the different steps took a decent amount of time. But had I started from a template, it's like this one here, which is one of our wireframe templates. So this is available in our library. And this is, again, a very similar template. It's going to be just a 4-tab click to reveal. It would take me a lot less time. So yesterday I did a stopwatch timer on myself to see how long it took me to style this template, similar to how I had that 3-tab done. And this is what I came up with. There's a few things that I would still do additionally to this, but this template itself took me about, it's like some of the animations still aren't timed quite correctly, but to get to even to this point, it was really only about 20 minutes to style a template and get it to this stage of where we're at. And so that was a lot less time. Obviously, there's still a lot of content that I need to put in here, things like that. But overall, this has saved me a lot of time just doing something that's already been done. So especially if you're starting with development, these templates can really help save you a lot of time and really give you a kind of a wow factor in your training pretty quickly because of the interactions that you can build there. And so with that all kind of being said, so that's kind of our first overall tip there. I'm actually going to pass it to Domenic to talk a little bit about building for your audience, and then I'll be back to kind of cover another part of that as well.
Okay, welcome everyone. I'm going to start off with something simple, and we're going to talk about translations. Building for your audience is tip number 2. And here I have an English page to translate. In some programs, some authoring tools, it's very difficult to do translations. In Lectura, it's very simple. I go to Tools on my toolbar on the top, Translations. And typically, there's 2 ways of exporting for a translation. I'm going to focus on RTF simply because an RTF file, we can open up in Microsoft Word, it's readable, it's editable, and it's going to be very easy to understand the process of what's going on. In the past, when I've worked for companies, I would translate the entire project. But here, for the demo purposes, I'm just going to translate 1 page. I'm going to include everything. I click Export, and then OK. Now, I've already exported it. I want to show you what that looks like. It's open, it's in a Word document. And let me drag that onto the screen. And you can see there's 1 page. There's the title of the page. There's my text body content. There's the label of the button. And this would be sent to a translator, and they would replace the English with the, in this case, I'm going to translate to Spanish. And the end product you would get back from the translation firm is the exact now, why is that page not showing up? That's odd. It's here someplace, folks. Here we go. All right. So it's the exact same page, except that the text is translated to Spanish. Notice everything in red is not edited. That is the coding. So Lectura, when it does an import, knows exactly where to put each of these translated pages. Let's go back to Lectura, and let's do an import. Translations, and now we're going to import. I'm going to browse for the file, the Spanish file, open, OK, and voila, it's translated into Spanish. Now, keep in mind, when you do this, you want to make a backup copy so you don't translate your original file and then you no longer have the original. What I did beforehand is I made a copy of the page. So I have my English page and I have my Spanish page. That's a simple way of doing translations, whether it be part of the course or the entire project. Back to you, Josh.
Thanks. Yeah, that's always really fun to see those things kind of happen magically there. When we were talking yesterday, Troy, who's the product manager, he's here with us as well. He mentioned that, watching Domenic kind of rehearse some of these things was like getting a peek behind the curtain of like the Wizard of Oz. And that's how I kind of feel too, because it's always kind of exciting to see these things happen.
It's like one of those old school movies where it's like you get to see the ninja vanish when they throw down the little Ninja Turtles. It's just like you get to see the guy just make the magic happen in front of you. It's really cool.
Yeah. So the other side of making training for, keeping your building for your audience here is around accessibility, which is something that we talk about quite often. So I'm not going to go into very much detail, but there's a couple of tips that I figured out over the years that help with, understanding how Lectora helps you build accessible training. Because there's really, with accessibility, there's only so much a program can actually do for you. You have to kind of know that process, think through yourself and how you're building your training and making that part of your design process and understanding those guidelines in there. But Lectora does do a very good job of, doing what it can to, help boost you in that particular aspect here. And so one of those things is just simply some settings that you need to apply. So that's just coming into project options here on the design ribbon and making sure you have this web accessibility settings checked, and then make sure that you have a focus color that's going to work well with your course, as well as, making sure that it's visible enough. So this is when somebody taps through, they're going to see this focus indicator there within the course itself. The other thing that kind of goes along with that is you do have the ability to set your reading order quite easily with Lectora by just how you order things in the Project Explorer. So when I talk to people about the Project Explorer, one of the things I typically explain is that it functions as basically an interactive outline of your course, but also similar to a layers panel in like a Photoshop or things like that, but in somewhat of a reverse order, because it's going to load, your pages are going to load like they would on an internet, on a website. And I always give the example of, for those of you that, are in that generation that remembers the 90s when the internet was first coming out and how pages loaded, you could actually see all the elements, kind of load on top of each other, depending on how fast your internet connection was, which typically back then was pretty darn slow. These days, we kind of take that for granted because it just happens pretty much instantaneously. But when we do have a slow connection, we can kind of see everything load as it would. And that's how Lectora kind of does function. Is it's going to read your backmost object first and then kind of proceed forward from there. And that's how you really want to affect your order there in the Project Explorer. Now, one of the biggest things that we run into is, okay, well, so with images, what do we do when we need to get alt text on there? Because if you notice this particular graphic right here, this is what we had in the beginning. We have some text on here and, things that I don't have as an actual text object on the page. So it does need to be read in this instance as alt text. So that way someone that isn't sighted can see it, can hear it through the screen reader. And there's a couple different ways you can accomplish that. One way is a little bit more clunky, in my opinion, is you can actually just take this label and put your alt text in there, but I don't recommend you do that. What I recommend doing is putting a text box behind this image. And in this case, I've just simply gone over to its style tab here on this text and made it completely transparent. I think, yeah, opacity. Because if I had this at 100%, we can see that you see the text there, but keeping it at that, keeping it kind of hidden there, it's kind of creating this hidden text object that's being read instead of the image there. And then at that point, you just simply want to set your actual image as having an empty alt tag. So that way it's kind of just skipping that in the reading order that you're going through. The last thing that I want to just touch on is the accessibility check tool here. And so if you come to the tools ribbon, you have the accessibility check. And so this will check against the 508 standard here and tell you some things that you need to go back and check into. So like I have a video in here, so it's telling me that I need to go make sure that my controller is going to be set in a certain way. And And it'll actually let you click on these and go exactly to the object that it's referring to. So that way you can easily find it in here. It gives you the 508 section that it's referencing here. And then if you see something that's down here in red, this is going to be something that is not going to work with a keyboard. So it's not going to be tabbable for someone that's using a screen reader. And so it's most likely something, if you're trying to build an accessible title, you're going to want to either take it completely out or make sure that there's another alternative for someone that is using that capability to use. And so in this case, this menu that I've included in this course is not accessible. And so if I was building this as a completely 508 project, I would want to take that out. But the nice thing is this is actually intentional for this demo today, so I could show that to you. But it will help you flag those different things. So it helps you build towards your audience there. But there's so much else we could go into with accessibility, because we've actually done a variety of different webinars and ebooks and things around it. One thing that you'll know and you'll notice in the future is we actually have some templates with accessibility in mind coming out here. At sometime later this year. It's I've seen it, it's in development. It's going to be really cool. I can't give you an exact date on it. I'm probably going to get in trouble for even saying this, but just know that we are committed to helping you make accessible training, whether you're just kind of starting with that or you're an expert in it at this point. So
Hey Josh, quick question. What
Yes.
version of Lectura are you using?
So this is Lectura Desktop 21. And so I think Dominic and I are both showing in desktop today. Most of these things will still work the same way in Lectura Online. In fact, I don't think there's anything that will work differently in what we're showing today. We just both, I think, when we're developing on our own, Dominic, you might be able to speak to this for yourself, but at least for me, like when I'm just developing something that I'm going to be using, I just use desktop just because it's, for me, it's a little bit easier, a little bit faster, just because it's using my computer hardware versus an internet connection. But that's just kind of my preference there.
All right, thank you.
So next up on the agenda is going beyond the static slide. And Dominic, this is back to you, my friend.
Thank you, Josh. And let's see if I can get the right screen here. Going beyond the static slide, variables. This is one of my favorite subjects. If you attended my past webinars, I've done some pretty complicated stuff with variables, including a chatbot built from scratch. I wouldn't recommend it. It's a lot of work, and you could probably get an app that'll do a much better job. But let's start off really simple. Here on the screen, I'm going to talk about reserved system variables. So if I click the play button, you can see that the variables that I had placed in Lectura are now showing the values. So I've got the page name, reserved variables. I've got the date. I've got page 4 of 21. The name didn't work. And the reason is the built-in variable in Lectura is the AICC student name, and that would come from the LMS. So when this is published as SCORM and you're serving it up on your LMS, the student's name would appear right here. Let's go back to edit mode. And the way I got these to show up on the screen is very simple. You create a text box, and in the text box, you put capital VAR, and in parentheses, the variable name. Let's take a look at tools, variables, and the reserved variables. This is a long list of the pre-made built-in variables that you have access to simply by calling them on your page. Let's move on to test variables. So here, actually, let's play this so I could enter in my name, quote, Mr. Dom. I've got a choice for my title, instructional designer, LXP, e-learning developer. Kind of like the e-learning developer title. I'll put that down. When I click submit button, what I'm doing is I'm retrieving the variables that I put in here and showing them here. Now, later on, there's a reason why I'm talking about the test and survey variables. Every time you create a test or a survey, each question has its own variable. And later on, when I do how to manipulate data, we're going to actually be using this principle, this feature to do some really amazing stuff. And I think I have one more example. This little example took a life of its own. I just wanted to have some clickable hotspots so I could show you something. And this is what I wound up with. I'm going to click the play button. So my job is to, can I draw a royal flush? Select 5 cards. So I'll start off with clicking 5 cards at random. And sorry, I did not pick a royal flush. Care to play again? Yeah. So when I click play again, I'm clearing out the variables. So I'll try again. Maybe it's these cards on the bottom. And as soon as I click on 5 cards, it ends my hand and I didn't make it. I'm going to play again. I think I'll try and get it right this time. Do it 10, Jack, Queen. I don't have to do it in order. Ace, King. Hey, congratulations, I won. What I'm doing here, go back to edit mode, is I've got hotspots on the cards. And when I click on it, it's doing a couple of things. It's adding 1 to my card count variable. And if you notice here, I have an underscore in front of the variable that I created. How did I do that? Again, let's go back to tools, variables, and add. I give my variable a name. And what I learned long ago, many years ago, when I first started working with variables, is someone told me to start your variables with an underscore. You don't have to do that. But the reason being is when I'm looking at my list of variables, the underscores are all going to come to the top. So instead of scrolling through all the built-in variables, I'll see all my variables on the top. And you're going to be working with your variables a lot. So that's a tip that I've used and I've never regretted. So the created variable is very simple. To give it a name, give it an initial value, you click OK, and your variable is created. What's pretty cool is that if I go to do something, let me cancel this. If I'm going to do something and I want a variable, but I haven't created it yet, pretty easily I can create one on the fly at the point of need. So this variable, I'm adding 1 every time I click to do a card count. When I hit 5, I've got an action in there that says show a pop-up message or show the winning hand image, depending upon if I got this variable, cards in hand. If it includes the ace, the jack, the queen, the king, and the 10, if it does that, if it contains that, show the winning hand. If not, show the message, you lose, try again. Keep this in, now these variables here, I'm going to use these again later on at the end. And that's it for variables. Back to you, Josh.
Yeah. Thanks, Dom. I like the tip about the underscore. I wish you would have told me that earlier. Dominic's seen some of my variable definitions and they scare him a little bit. And you'll see that here in a moment, what he means by that. But so what I'm going to talk about is connected to that. And we're back to this interaction that I built here. But that's the use of actions. And so variables and actions kind of work in tandem together to help you create very interactive and engaging content. And there's a couple different, like, I guess, forms of actions or types of actions you can use. You can use just a standard action, like what we're going to be seeing kind of here is just something that basically does one particular thing to one particular object at a time. But then you have these things called action groups as well as conditional variables. So action groups are something that, like what you're seeing right here. So this is a group within Lectora, but it just contains actions. And so whenever I want to fire this particular action group, which is basically meaning that all these actions are going to fire at the same time. So this kind of helps keep things a little bit cleaner in the Project Explorer. So that way, when you're doing like buttons and things like that, you're triggering action groups versus individual actions on each button if you're trying to do repetitive tasks. And so in this case, I want hide contents to be on all my buttons, but I really didn't want to replicate these exact same steps to be on each of my buttons. So instead, I created this action group. And then here on each one of my buttons here, I'm simply just running on mouse click, run this action group and targeting this hide contents action group here. So that way it's firing that. And as you can see, I have a lot of other actions and action groups firing from this particular button to create some of the interactivity that you're seeing in this particular interaction. Now, some of these actions are also going to be conditional, which means that there's some variable that's been set that's going to affect how these fire when they're interacted with. So in this case, I want to use a set state action to basically set the button to a visited state once someone has clicked on it. But I want to do this only if this particular variable, like you said, my variable definitions are a bit more complex than Domenic. I'm going to adopt his format going forward. But if this particular variable, which is being modified by clicking this button, is equal to this particular value here. And so that way it's only happening if those things are if this exact condition is met. Now you can do an any condition is met as well. And let me show you just an example of that here and just an example of some other ways you can trigger this. So on this particular next button, I have this one go to action here. But with conditional actions, you can set kind of the initial action that you want it to do. So in this case, I want it to go to the next page, but only if certain conditions are met. Otherwise, I want to go back to that agenda that you saw earlier. So this is kind of creating a branching course in this sense, where it's going through a particular chapter and then branching back to a central page, their central hub. And so in this case, the if variables here are just using the built-in pages and chapter, page and chapter, and current page name. I did this so that way the agenda, you could actually go to the next page past it. So that's why I'm setting that equal to this particular value. But in this case, if pages in the chapter are less than the number of pages within the chapter, it's going to keep going to the next page. But if it's at the highest page within that chapter, it's going to revert back to that agenda. So that way it's creating this kind of branching path. And you'll notice here that rather than having all conditions met, I said if any of these are met. So that way it would allow for a lot more flexibility in how this action is going to fire and let you kind of move around to it. And so these can help you really create very engaging different kind of interactivity, showing different scores, things like that, as you're developing your course. And they can be very powerful to get the functionality that you need out of this particular, just this one element here. Because I did that all with one action here, just by setting it up as kind of this conditional action here. So, and next one. Okay, we're going to talk about reusing what you've already built, which kind of relates to don't build stuff from scratch, but there is some functionality that we want to talk about that's a little different here. So we'll get away from those cute corgis. They'll be back in a minute. But but the first thing that we want to talk about is the concept of inheritance within Lectora. So again, going back to the Project Explorer as paradigm that we're using to navigate our development process. If you're new to Lectora, one thing that you might not know, and that we explain quite often, is the fact that there are different levels within your project. So you have the base project level, which is going to be any objects that are located above your first chapter or page. And then you have each of your individual chapters in there that are kind of optional organizational elements, but you can add a chapter in there that adds another level of within that inheritance to put objects in one location and have them carried down to the rest of your project there. And so in this, for instance here, so this particular, these particular objects, so the additional fonts that I've added here, as well as the chapter title text here, and the rounded rectangle that's creating this button up here at the top, which I need to go back and rename to menu button, to the menu here. It's going to carry these each down so that they can be present on each of the individual pages, but they're only located in one spot. So you only have to go back and edit them there. So to show this as an example here, well, on each of your individual pages and in each of your different, even your individual organizational levels at chapters and sections, you can control what's actually inherited into that particular organizational element. So in this case, on this page right now, you're probably thinking, Josh, this is a blank page. You did something wrong. No, we're going to create kind of a fun little layout here just by using inheritance. So when you come over to the page properties tab, you can click on inherit, and you have a few different options here. it's either going to inherit all the objects from the parents. So from that, project level, as well as from the chapter level, which is where these cute little corgis and these, jungle cats were, or it can inherit none from those different levels. So you notice all of those disappeared. But I can also just have it inherit what is selected. So in this case, I want it to inherit this title. I want it to inherit this corgi picture. This menu here, the navigation. Now we're just going to kind of put everything over there, because you can actually come in here and shift click everything over here, I believe, and move it over all at once. And that recreated our page there. So you can use inheritance to keep things at a certain level and keep one instance of them there. So that way they can cascade down to each individual page that's underneath it, saving you a lot of time because you're just reusing an object that is part of your course already. And Dominic, I'll send it over to you.
Josh, you're a tough act to follow with all those cute cats.
That's why they're there.
We use what you already built, macros. I believe, Stephanie, we have a poll to throw up, and we're doing good on time. So
Yes, let me get that poll. So,
online survey time. Get ready with your mouse. Get ready to
all
click,
right.
guys.
And so when Dominic talks about macros, you're talking about the library object.
Not Stephanie.
Oh,
one
did
thing
I
at a
steal
time,
your
please.
thunder?
Don't
Well, I
steal-
just wanted them to know what to answer the poll.
It's all gonna.
I
all right,
ruined
let's
it
do the
all,
poll.
you guys.
Let's see. Basically, I want to know how many people, since we have a lot of experience Lectura uses, how many people are using macros? And if you use it in another tool, that's fine also, but I just want to know how many people are using macros. What I'm about to show you, I find on instructional design teams I've worked on, not too many people use this stuff. People just don't get it. They don't know the power of it. So do we have a survey or not? We're just
Yes, it's on the screen. We've got some
Okay.
interesting results. I think I'll give everybody one more second to get their clicks in, and then I'll share those results with everybody.
Great.
All right, so here are the results. So it looks like about half of our attendees are not using macros. Some are using them in Lectura. Little bit in Storyline, and then other tools.
That is very interesting. So let me show you macros. I'm going to click on this page, and I want to add a privacy policy to this page. Typically, companies will have the exact same privacy policy all the time. So instead of having to type it or copy and paste it, I'm going to go to my library, go into my macros folder, and this is going to be privacy policy, double click, and there it is, folks. So you can see not only is the text there, but all the styling and formatting is there also. That's one example. Let's take a look at another one. In the previous company I worked for, we had a style guide. And if you're working for a major corporation, you probably have the same thing. And it's kind of frustrating when you're working in a Lectura project that's 40 or 50 pages long, and you're trying to format something and you're wondering, do I have the right color? Is this allowed? Because you don't want to get screamed at the end of producing a 40, 50 page project, only to find out that you have not been using the style guide. So I want to bring the style guide into my project. I'm going to go back to my macros folder. And where is my style guide? Right here. I'm going to double click and voila. Now this time, here's the page that I needed the style guide. This macro put in an entire page. How cool is that? Now I could use my color picker and make sure I've got the exact matching colors. I can see the styling that's approved by my company for the buttons. I've got my text formatting. Pretty cool. So I'm never ever without my style guide, just a button away. The next example, role play. Now Josh showed you some pretty complicated interactions with the asset library. I'm going to use the same thing. But I'm going to go to my macro library, and I believe this is the one right here. And when I click on this, let's take a look at what I got. Let's play this. Now I have this interaction from the asset library. All the graphics, go back to edit mode, all the graphics, all the actions to make that work in one click. Now, remember when Josh did some styling to an interaction downloaded from the asset library? So now envision this. You have an interaction, you've styled it, you spent all that time and effort, and you're on a corporate team. Either you may want to use it again and just edit it for another project, or you may be the advanced Lectura user and you may want to share this with other members of the team. Share the macro, let them use it, and they very quickly have a styled to your style guide, your requirements. You have it styled and ready to go and ready to reuse. And I have another one, I believe. Yes, add a test to this course. If you take a look at my Project Explorer, I do have a survey at the end, but there's no exam. So I'm going to click on the end towards the end of my course, go here, and I'm going to test. This should be the one, my test macro. Double click, and let's click on it. Here I have a test template. The templates that come with Lectura may not suit your need exactly. You may want to customize it. I mean, take a look at the graphics here. So imagine if most of your courses have a 10-question exam at the end, you could formulate a 10-question exam styled for your organization, and at the click of a button, add it so it's properly formatted. And that is the power of macros. Now you may be thinking to myself, where do I find macros? That's the hidden secret. That's why not too many people know about how to do this. I'm going to go back to my privacy policy. Now, when I clicked on add privacy policy, all I got was this. Let's say, well, Dom, I want to have everything. I want to have the title also. That'd be pretty cool to have everything. If I click on everything on this page, I've got these two items right here. If I right click and then go to save as library object and give it a name, privacy policy. Well, I don't want to say page, and I'll explain why in a moment. I'm going to say full. Now I go to my library. I'm in the macros folder. I don't see it. By default, library objects are saved in my in library objects, and I've got privacy policy full. So when I click this now, well, if I go to a blank page, now here I have a blank page. Let's delete this, and go to privacy policy full. Everything appears. Now you know the secret to using macros. And what I did for the sake of this demo and to make it easy is I actually created a folder called macros, and I drag and drop them in here for easy access. I prefix the name of my macro with PG, just as a reminder that I'm going to insert a whole page. But you could insert a contents of a page, including actions. You could include an entire page, a chapter, a whole exam. Basically, if I clicked on the title and right-clicked and add to library objects, I will be able to actually copy an entire course. And where's my save as library objects? Not letting me do it on that level, but right here, okay, save as library object, I could replicate an entire course. And that is the power of macros, which you're going to see coming up again. Actually, if I'm looking at the itinerary, I keep going for the next tip. Oh, and we have under macros here, let me do collapse all. We have another poll. What we'd like to know is not what's your name. We know what your name is. What's your name that you like best for what I just showed you? Do you like it as library object and keep it the way it is because you're used to it? Would you like it to be changed to macro? Or is macro too academic and old school? Do you think you have a cooler name for this feature? We'd like to know.
All right, so that poll is up on the screen right now. So go ahead and just click on your answer. And if you don't like library objects or macros, but you have a better idea for us, feel free to put that in the chat. I can't promise that we'll use it, but we'll definitely consider it. Right now, it does look like library objects is winning because nobody likes change.
Okay.
Oh, we have a great suggestion in the chat. We should just call it the easy button.
I like that.
I think that Staples would probably come after us, but maybe for like a few glorious months, we could get away with it.
We'll check on the copyright of that particular name there.
Yeah. All right. So I'm going to end this poll and I will share those results on the screen for you right there. So it does look like library objects is winning, but it seems like there's some openness if we can come up with a cooler name.
Well, that just shoots down my idea of renaming it to macros, but the populace speaks. There's power to the people. It's going to save the dev team a little effort if they just leave it as library objects. But I'm hoping that for those who have not used macros, because we had a lot of people saying they've never used macros, I hope now that you will start using it, because in my experience, a lot of instructional designers do not realize the power of it, and they're really not using it to its full potential. The next tip is up to me. Number 5, using media effectively. Captions. I'm going to run this page here. And I've created a closed caption button. When I click on it, it animates into place. And you can see I made it semi-transparent. So if it's covering content, I'm not hiding anything that might be important. And the user, if they say, "Ooh, I see there's something on there, I want a clearer look," they could just hide and unhide it. And as I'm doing this, you can see I'm showing you that I'm also changing a variable. If there's no closed captioning visible, it's a 0. And if there is a closed captioning variable, it's a 1. Now, why am I doing that? When I go to the next page, it checks what my variable is. And if it's a 1, it automatically shows the transcript. And if it's not, if I go back to 0 and I go back to that page where it was showing, it doesn't show. So this makes it dynamic, and the user can set the transcript to either show or hide and have it be remembered for the entire course. And yet, on a page-by-page basis, they have the control of turning it off if they want to see what's underneath it. So I'm going to click Next. And what I did to create the button, I've got 2 states. One state is without the X, and one is with the X. And every time I click on the button, not only am I changing the variable, I'm also changing the state. So the button toggles itself into different states, and the button toggles the visibility on and off, and the variable makes it remember it from page to page. And what happened? There's no closed captioning here. So let me go back to edit mode. Not a problem, not a problem. I'm going to go back to my library and go into my macros and add CC, and there I have it. And all the variable tracking, everything is there. So this gives you one more example of how to use macros. So imagine yourself being a developer on a team, and you've got a library of macros where you could quickly add things like privacy policy, style guide, closed captioning, and have at your fingertips without having to reprogram and rework and rebuild these things and worry if someone made a little mistake in the actions or the coding and stuff like that. So I think this is pretty awesome. And over to you, Josh.
Yeah. So for my last little bit of this webinar, and then we do have one more thing after our switch here. But as far as using media effectively, another element of Lectora that I find quite interesting, and when I talk to people, it's something that they're very interested in, is our what we call media sync events. So this works on both audio and video. All the examples I'm showing today are video, but these sync events basically allow you a different way to trigger an action based off of the timeline of a video. So as you come here and preview your video, you can actually pause this and add an event at different times within the timeline and create different types of objects showing up, or maybe the navigation button being disabled and re-enabled, and things like that you can do with it. So like in this particular example here, I'm just animating on 3 different lines of text at 3 different points within this particular video. So I'm not going to share the audio with you. I did actually add closed captioning to this video so you can kind of see what I'm saying here, but this was just a video file that I happened to have. And so as I come over here to play this, I'll go ahead and click on here. And what you'll see is that on these different markers that I've set with those sync events, it's going to trigger different text popping onto the screen here. And so now it's going to pop that 3rd line on there. And then I'm going to show you a couple other examples here. So in this particular one, I'm actually going to pop on an interaction at a certain point within this video to just kind of show, to stop the video, pause it, make sure that the learner is paying attention, have them click through. And obviously this is that same interaction you saw earlier, a little more simplified here. And as I close it, it's going to start the video again. And that just gives you a way to kind of break up the video, so that way they're not just sitting there watching it the entire time without having some sort of engagement. And another way that that's used, and that you can use this, is to, in this case, trigger a question popping on the screen. So this is very similar to that last example, but this is just to give you some ideas, get some juices flowing about what you can do with this. But you can really trigger whatever you want based off of these different events here. So in this case, I'm triggering a question. I'll go ahead and click submit there. I'll close it. Again, it's going to restart that video. And so you do have that ability to create and time different actions to different video and audio. So like with audio, if you're using that, you could time different animations for a scenario or something coming onto the screen to simulate that with an audio clip that's maybe played off screen or whatnot, to create that kind of a scenario there. And so a very powerful thing when you're using media is to use this as a way to create more interactivity within your course and keep your learners very much more engaged. And so with let's see, I see a question. Josh, are you using VTT files for your CC? Yes, I am. Yeah, that's what I used in this particular methodology. There's a couple of different options for CC, but that's the one that I found the easiest for me to implement into my my videos here. So I'm going to pass it over to Dom for the last little bit, and I think we might have a few minutes after that for some questions. So.
Okay, Josh, I got the heads up that I can't take the remaining full 10 minutes. Okay, number 6, I'm going to build upon what I've showed you earlier with the variables. And I remember I mentioned that we're going to come back to the fact that whenever you create a test or a survey, it automatically generates variables. So in this survey, I've just put on one page all the variables that I've showed you in this course. You've got the name, the job title, the number of games played, the hand that that I played, the closed caption status, whether it was a 0 or 1. So all this information is in the survey. If I click on the actions that I have on this page, For each one of these, I've got a modified variable. So the variable for survey question number 1, I'm saying that equal to the course title. So what I'm saying is, since the survey automatically comes up with variables waiting to be determined by how you answer the survey, it's an empty variable waiting for input. I'm not going to want to have people take the survey. I want to replace the empty variable with the contents of variables that I've already used in the course. So each one of these variables, so let's take a look at the job title. So survey question number 3, the job title, I'm changing it to be my variable, which is underscore job title. I've done that with all these pieces of information. And then when I click this button and I click on process the survey, what's going to happen is, go back to the survey, click on behavior. This is really cool. Built into Lectura is an area where you could say, send to Google Drive. So let's test this out. And, whenever we're cooking live, as Emerald says, you always run the risk of things not working. But let's go back to the export page and let's click this. Let's go live in order to click it. And let's click this. I don't know why these are coming up empty. Let's see. Survey responses have been submitted. That's a good sign. And then let's go to the results page and run this. And okay, so here is the submission for today. And for some reason, it's not picking up on these two. Games played is 1. Okay, embarrassing moments here. You can see on previous tests, you can see the way everything's been answered. And for some reason, it didn't pick up on these two. So I'd have to go back and check why those variables disappeared. But anyway, let's go on to the next page, which is going to be how this is done. Here's the link. If you want to do a screen capture, or if you want me to, I could drop it into the chat. Here's the link to the instructions of doing what I just did. How to build a Google Sheet, the template for it, how to use the properties bar for the test or the survey, and where to put the information that sends it to your form. Here's the instructions if you're using Articulate. And I got to tell you, I've used both of these. It's way easier using Lectura. There's like absolutely no comparison between the two. And then I found this one, so I was looking for a way of doing it in Captivate. And I found this widget that's available for both Articulate and Captivate. And I haven't tried this one yet. But if you want to do a screen capture, these are links that you can use to take your variable data and send it to Google Sheets. And I use this a lot when I'm developing an adaptive course. In an adaptive course, every single page, the learner has options to display content a little bit differently. And if I want to learn about my uses, I like to track that data and see exactly what different learning paths people took through an adaptive course. So with that, that concludes our 6 tips. And we could open it up to Q&A.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. So I believe there was the question in the chat, Josh, the media sync example you were showing. If you were using an embedded video player, would you still be able to do all those interactions with that feature?
I would have to test that one out. I believe so. An embedded video player. So we're talking like a YouTube link. Like, what are we talking about there?
That's a great question. Let's see, Joel, if you want to add
YouTube or Wistia. Okay. Yes. I believe you can. I think we have an example of that actually in the template library, where a video in the solar system course, I believe that one is being pulled in from YouTube, and they are using media sync events there.
Okay, awesome. If there are no more questions, I think we can wrap this up. Thank you so much, Dominic and Josh, for sharing these tips today. I know I learned some new things. It sounds like people in the chat learned some new things, and we all got some exciting new ideas for making cool stuff in Lectura.